It just wouldn't be Halloween unless we took a trip through the Barger's haunted house. Welcome to Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Today, we'll be making our way through the Barker's haunted house to see if we can't help some poor unfortunate souls find their way in the darkness. First, we have a story about a young playboy who may have a very particular set of fears. Fears that make him very appealing to a man like the Barker. So, let's hear a story about what he feared most. The smell of spent gasoline and day-old garbage assaulted Derek as he stepped onto the street. He always waited till sunset to head to McLeod's. That was when the best prospects were out. Derek had wanted the alcohol almost an hour before sunset, but he knew that if he intended to go to bed with someone tonight, he needed to pace himself. A woman might accept a man's advances if she was drunk, but they would rarely spend time with a strange drunk while they were sober. This was a lesson that Derek had learned early on, and it was likely the only thing that stopped him from being a full-blown alcoholic. His phone chirped, and Derek fished it out hopefully, wanting to see what cutie was texting him so early. He sighed when he recognized Charlene's number, asking if he would be at the bar tonight. Charlene, the one-night stand who wouldn't take a hint. He had slept with her about 5 months ago, and the sex hadn't been worth the constant dodge that he now had to run with her. Despite his better judgment, he'd taken her out a few more times since their hookup, but he had never taken her back to bed again. Derek did not stop for seconds, and as he put the phone back in his pocket, he knew he'd have to cut her off soon. Besides, he had other prospects these days. As he rounded the corner, Derek couldn't help but see the spotlights in front of the old warehouse that had once been the cannery. The man out front was doing his best, but most of the people were heading on past without a second look. Derek could feel the urge to drink, almost as strongly as the urge to bury someone who lived rent-free in his head. But he stopped for a moment as he looked at the sign strung over the door of the warehouse. Derek scoffed as he read it. A truly frightening experience, or your money back. What a bunch of bull crap. The man looked like the titular carnival barker. His jacket was black with red thread to accent the cuffs and collar, not to mention the garish gold buttons that glimmered from the dark coat. He wore a tall black hat and handlebar mustache, and his grin made Derek think he was not to be trusted. He stood before what looked to be a very old and decrepit warehouse, a place Derek had driven by 1,000 times and never looked at twice. Now it was hung with streamers and cast in the buttery light of 2 searchlights. The windows of the warehouse danced with a murky half-light, like a fire slowly burning out, and the lack of screaming and giggling teenagers coming back out the front made Derek wary. This time of the year, an empty haunted house was always suspicious. Come one, come all, see your greatest fears realized, or your money back. Derek turned to fix the man with a disbelieving eye. That so? That's so, young man. Be warned, this haunted house is unlike anything you've experienced before. This house will show you things you didn't know about yourself and tap into what truly scares you. Derek scoffed, but he fished out a 20 and a crumpled 5 and laid it in the box. This better be worth it, he grumbled. The barker smiled toothily as he slid the bills into a lockbox. I can assure you, sir, it will be worth every penny. As Derek went inside, his phone chirped again. He stopped in the entryway and looked down. seeing a picture of an empty stool and asking if he would be there tonight. It was from Charlene because, of course it was. She appeared to be waiting to ambush him at his favorite watering hole. He considered just going home and drinking the vodka he had ignored in the fridge since he'd come home from work, but decided that he wouldn't let her stop him from having a good time. Maybe tonight was the perfect opportunity to break it off with her and make it stick. Derek stepped into the cold cloud of smoke as a nearby fog machine belched its payload and was suddenly surrounded by an active bar scene. It was pretty well done. It looked just like McLeod's, the place he'd been heading. McLeod's was where he often picked up the best trim, and he would likely find himself there tonight sometime. Derek didn't like to go to bed sober, or alone. When he was alone and sober with his thoughts, he inevitably thought of her. He groaned as he walked into the bar, wondering if this was one of those religious haunted houses by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It had all the earmarks: hazy bar, people milling about, shadowy corners where bad actors waited to jump out and startle you. Derek couldn't believe he'd just given his money to one of these religious nuts and their revival miracle tents. He supposed he couldn't be too angry. The man had offered a full refund when he got out. Derek might as well see what there was to the house and get his $25 back as well. He approached the bar, not imagining they'd have any alcohol, but willing to play along. The man behind the counter was dressed in the usual attire that Thomas always wore. Thomas seemed to love to dress like the old men out of a barbershop quartet. Suspenders, handlebar mustache, striped waistcoat, shiny black shoes, and immaculately coiffed hair. As he approached the bar, however, he noticed something different. His face looked like someone had used an eraser to make it a flesh-colored smudge. He looked up at Derek, silent as the grave, as he stared eyelessly at him. Derek tried to order a gin and tonic, but the not Thomas just shrugged and went back to what he was doing, turning away from Derek as he went back to work. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Derek yelled, but as he tried to reach over the bar and grab the not Thomas by the sleeve, the man walked away and went to serve some other oddly smudged individuals at the end of the bar. They all seemed to have that weird thing going on with their faces. Derek wondered if it were a theme or something, and if so, he didn't get it. He sighed as he sat back down, waiting for the bartender to come back. The smudged Thomas clone was more like the real Thomas than he knew. Thomas had gotten into a fight 3 nights ago, and Derek's reception at McLeod's had been icy ever since. It was Thomas's fault, really. If he wanted to bed Janet, then he should have made his move. Derek wanted her, Thomas wanted her, but Derek had struck first, and now Janet was just another notch on his bedpost. The problem was that when Janet realized that she'd been nothing but an evening's distraction for Derek, she had switched to one of the other dive bars in town. Now Thomas blamed him for running her off. "I don't know why I'm bothering to talk to you at all," Thomas had said. "It's like being mad at a dog for eating your sandwich. He's a hungry mutt, after all, who only knows that he wants to eat." "Seems like the bartender might be a little upset with you." Derek jumped and glanced over at a familiar-looking brunette who had sat down beside him. She was dressed in a short black dress, her leggings artfully ripped and her shiny black hair hung in her face. When she smiled, he could see that the teeth were slowly slipping into unevenness, but he found it charming. The longer he looked at her, the more familiar she seemed and the less like anyone else he had ever seen. "You must have slept with some girl he liked." She was drinking something through a straw with a distinctly fruity smell, but the thickness and the color reminded him more of a bag of blood. As he watched it slip up the straw, he felt a little sick to his stomach. He could see her throat working as she drank, her eyes closing as she enjoyed it, and Derek was powerless to break her stare as much as he wanted to look away. As a trickle ran down the corner of her mouth, he finally found the strength to clear his throat and glance around the smoky bar. This was definitely the oddest haunted house he'd ever been to, and he was beginning to doubt his previous suspicions of a religious experience. Do I know you?" he asked, scanning the bar to see if there was someone else that he knew. The girl was cute, but looking at her made him feel weird in a way that he hadn't in a long time. She grinned as she drank, the soupy sound of the drink disappearing up the straw, making his skin crawl. It was like listening to someone drain a corpse with a bendy straw. "Not for long, though you think about me often enough. In a way, I'm the reason you do the things that you do. I'm never far from your mind, though you wish I wasn't. You can try to drink me away, Derek, but I'll never truly be gone." Derek laughed, but there was no mirth in it. He was thinking that the woman had captured his earlier thoughts perfectly. Do you always talk in riddles to people you've just met in a bar?" He turned back, but something was different about her. Had she been wearing glasses before? They didn't really fit the elegant dress she was wearing. They were thick, like a librarian's, the kind that are more function than form. She was still pretty, but the glasses looked like a prop on the well-dressed young woman rather than something she needed. Only to people who can't understand plain speech. His phone buzzed, and Derek checked it to see that Charlene had sent him another text. She wanted to know how he was, to let him know that she was thinking about him. She was so clingy. Why wouldn't she take a hint? Didn't she realize that he wasn't being coy when he went home with other women? That he wasn't playing hard to get when he didn't return her calls or answer his door? She wanted to lock him down, but he couldn't stay with her. He'd start seeing that body as it lay in the casket, hear her words as she told him she was leaving, and the only thing that would make it go away would be the drink. I'd like to say you've grown into a fine man, but we know it isn't true. You've changed very little since high school, Derek, and I doubt you ever will." "Well, that's something to work with. Did we go to high school together then? Were you some little nerdlet that I never called back? Maybe some one-night stand I ghosted after I was done? Had she had the pimples when she first arrived?" He had only looked away for a second, but she had just the slightest hint of acne across each cheek, like a dusting of freckles. They weren't the livid pustules of a teen experiencing their first crop, but the last light kiss of puberty that an 18-year-old might experience, before they simply dried up and were no more than a momentary problem after that. She smiled as she noticed him noticing them, and he thought again that her teeth seemed odd. Had she once had braces, maybe? "No, we were never intimate. I think you would have liked to have been, but..." She paused long enough to take a sip of her drink, the liquid having returned by some unnoticed bartender. "You were so painfully shy around me. You could speak confidently to any cheerleader or popular girl at school, but you were utterly befuddled by me and my braces and my glasses." Derek was speechless. She couldn't be who she was claiming to be. Lisa was... "I'm sorry," Derek said, glancing over and seeing someone he hoped he recognized. I see someone else I know. I should really say hi to them." He slid off the bar stool and onto wobbly legs that almost spilled him onto the floor. The young woman, younger now than she had been at the start, smiled at him as she showed off a mouthful of metal. "Take your time, Derek. I don't have anywhere to be. I'll be waiting for you. I'm always waiting for you," she said, throwing the last at Derek's back as he rushed off into the small crowd. He thought the woman's name was Cindy, or maybe Chelsea. He only recognized her from the back because that was the most memorable image he had of her in his head. Her blonde hair was still long and soft as it rolled down her back, and when he approached, she was talking with a small group of hazy people. Their faces looked scrunched, their features swirls of eraser marks, and when he touched her, she turned around slowly. "Thank God, Cindy. Did the guy on the sidewalk talk you into this weird little—" But he stopped when he saw her face. Her face was as smooth and featureless as the others, and she took one look at him and walked away without a word. "Cindy," he called, taking a step towards her before catching sight of a familiar brown ponytail as its owner leaned over the bar. Mary was a staple at McLeod's. She might have been a little too old for Derek, her status as a cougar established before Derek had taken his first drink at the bar, but she'd been sweet for an evening. He batted at the ponytail playfully, waiting for her to turn around so he could ask her what the hell she was doing here. She'd been a little icy to him after he'd slept with her, but surely she'd help him figure out what was going on before he had a freaking breakdown. She turned around angrily when he batted at her braid, and Derek saw that she was also smooth and featureless from eyebrows to chin. She huffed and took herself elsewhere, and as Derek watched, he became aware that most of the people in the bar were women who looked very familiar. One-night stands, old girlfriends, sexual conquests of every flavor, and all of them milling about like they couldn't see him or couldn't care less. They pressed in as their numbers swelled, but Derek remembered them all. It was impressive and depressing how many women you could sleep with in a 6-year period, and Derek found that he was adrift in a sea of jaded barflies. They had their own tidal pull, and as Derek tried to push his way to the door, they seemed to pull him back towards the bar with each push he made to escape them. When someone wrapped a hand around his and pulled him back towards the stool, he accepted it without protest. It was the not Lisa, and she looked a lot more familiar now. She wore the same ripped leggings and puffy sweater dress she'd been wearing the night of the party. The leggings were no longer ripped artfully. Derek could see glass shards and torn skin beneath them. The sweater was dotted with red splotches, and he might have thought she'd been shot if he hadn't known what had killed her. The left lens of her glasses was a spider web, pristine ice broken by a stray rock. And he did remember that. After all, they had buried her in those glasses, and he remembered it being the only thing imperfect about her as she lay in her casket. It was the only thing real about her after the coroner was done making her beautiful again. "Why are you here?" Derek asked, watching the throng of women as they surged around the bar he was sitting on. "It's not enough that I live with your ghost every day. Now I have to see you too?" "Oh, gee, I'm sorry that I'm the stick you jab yourself with on every occasion. Unfortunately for you, I'm your greatest fear. Not me, not really, but what I represent. You can't let yourself be close to anyone, not like you were with me. You can't open up and embrace intimacy. In a way, I am the manifestation of your issues with intimacy. You bury your fears and woe in an endless sea of sex, and you're never satisfied. No matter how much you drink or how many women you go to bed with, you'll never lose my ghost, not until you let yourself forget me." His phone buzzed again, and he saw that Charlene had texted him. Her message was a little different this time. She told him how very sorry she was that she had bothered him so much, and how she'd stopped trying to insert herself into his life. She apologized for not being enough for him, and hoped he had a good night. Derek looked at the phone, feeling his stomach knot as he thought about how he had run off another one. "She seems nice. Maybe you could give her a chance." "I can't," Derek said. "What if I let her down, like I let you down? What if I accidentally kill her, too?" Lisa smirked, and it did interesting things to her broken face. "You blame yourself for my death, but did you really have anything to do with it?" Derek scoffed. How would he not caused her death? He'd been too focused on drinking and partying to make sure that his girlfriend got home safely. He had stood right there and let her leave with someone else, instead of taking her himself. "Why do you think that's your fault? I would have left regardless. You no more caused my death than the tree we hit did. Let it go." Derek could see that night, the same night he always saw when it haunted his nightmares. They had been at Marty Jenner's party, the one he held before Christmas break every year, and Derek was drunker than he'd ever been. Lisa didn't drink. He had dragged her to this party, mostly so he could show off his new girlfriend, and it was clear that she was done with it. When he tried to kiss her, she had pulled away, telling him that his breath smelled like rotten fruit. He had told her not to be such a prude, and she had told him that she was leaving. Kyle Warden, one of the guys on the football team with Derek, had also been leaving. He was less drunk than Derek, but that wasn't saying much. Derek had been hung over the next day when her mother called to give him the bad news. Kyle had wrapped his vehicle around a tree 3 blocks from his house, killing both of them instantly. Derek had never forgiven himself for that, and he'd stayed pickled for the rest of his life. Looking at Lisa now made him feel even worse. "Forget about it. Forget about me," she said. "Stop torturing yourself. You had nothing to do with my death. Let yourself be happy. And let go before it's too late." She swam before his eyes, and it was only then that Derek was aware he was crying. His phone chirped again, and he saw that Charlene was calling this time. As he picked it up, he saw the women part, leaving him a clear path to the exit. Give her a chance, a real chance. Let yourself be happy for a change. Derek left, apologizing for being so distant, as he and Charlene made plans to meet up at McLeod's in a few hours. "So," said the barker, as Derek stepped back onto the street, "did you discover something truly terrifying?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, I think I might have also found something I'd lost, too." He dropped another 20 into the box as he walked, and the barker smiled as he watched him leave shakily. Another satisfied customer. Moving deeper into the haunted house, we find another man who seems to have a problem with his emotions. Well, the problem seems to be that he eats them up like potato chips. So let's hear a story about comfort food. "Do you have to go out tonight?" she asked, sounding plaintive as he came out of the bathroom. George looked a little silly in his running clothes, the combination still making him look like a beach ball, even months after he'd started running in the evenings. He'd been checking his weight on the bathroom scale, and the news was dire, as it always seemed to be. The dial had spun around for a moment, and he had been hopeful that it might show improvement. He'd been running for 9.5 months, despite his mother's protests, and every time he stepped onto the scale, he prayed that it would show him some improvement. When it settled on 285, however, George sighed. In nearly 10 months, he had lost 8 pounds. As disheartened as he was, George couldn't say this came as much of a surprise. He had returned from his first run to discover that his mother had laid out a 4-course meal for him. "I do," he said as he patted his belly and prepared to be stared at. "It might take my mind off the candy I see absolutely everywhere." His eyes lingered on the bowl by the door, a bowl that would be a lot lighter 2 nights from now. His mother looked at him from the couch, and with her girthy form seated on the old lime-colored couch, he felt a little guilty as he thought of her as a frog on a lily pad. She had been this way for as long as he could remember, but these contrasts were something that he had only recently began to think about. "Why not stay in tonight?" she asked, smiling wetly as her neck grew smaller and her chin threatened to rest against her breasts. "I've got candied apples and chocolate pretzels, and I'm working on some pumpkin seeds that are almost ready to come out of the oven. Nibble, nibble, little mouse. Come have a taste of my candy house." That one hurt his heart, and he knew he had to go before he let these feelings worm their way to the surface. "No, I need to be diligent about this," he said. "I'm nearly 300 pounds, and my doctor says—" "Oh, nuts to what he says. You're the picture of health. Those doctors get paid to fill your head with bad news. Come sit with me. We can watch a Halloween movie and nibble some snacks, just like we used to when you were younger." Yeah, George reflected. There had been a lot of nibbling over the years as they sat together. A lot of nibbling, and very little else. "I need to do this, Mom. I need to—" "To what?" she said, her voice suddenly on edge. "So you can leave me here by myself? If you're in such a hurry to leave your mother behind, then go. Don't come crying to me when nobody is waiting for you when you come home." "Mom," George said, taken off guard by the shift. "It's not—" "Just go," she said, waving her hands. "I wouldn't want to keep you from your new life." George started to stay, started to give in yet again, but instead he kissed his mother on her flat, oily hair and left. She would be back to normal when he came back. She always was, and he wasn't sure why the flashes of anger always caught him off guard. He got to the sidewalk as the last golden rays of afternoon tried to assert themselves on a city prepared for night. He popped his earbuds in and started jogging, trying not to pay attention to the people around him. He knew there was a certain amount of jiggle going on, but he didn't care. He couldn't afford a gym membership, and there was nowhere else to run, unless he took a bus to the park, which was just as crowded. People would stare wherever he went, which was the other reason he hadn't lost any weight. George didn't really have a problem with eating. Not really. George had a problem with anxiety and confidence. George had always been a big guy, but his weight gain was something that had happened in the last 5 years. George's father had died when he was 7, and it had nearly broken his mother. The fact that his father had died of a heart attack was irrelevant to her, and she had turned all of her attention to George. George's dad was a big guy, though George knew that hadn't always been the case. Before they moved in together, George Sr. was in great physical shape, and he'd been on his fraternity's rowing team and had done track well enough to go to nationals a few times. It wasn't until he got married that some of that muscle began to turn to fat. By the time George was born, his father was pushing 300 pounds and was a certified couch potato. George was actually the same age his father had been when he and his mother had gotten married, and he wanted desperately not to share his father's fate. He saw the woman's eyes widen as she stepped out of his way, his jog becoming a run, and it hurt his stride a little. George got looks like that pretty often, and he didn't think people realized how much it affected him. George didn't want to be this large. He wanted to be able to run down the sidewalk without making people nervous that he would trip and crush them, but as he watched them step away from him and saw the looks on their faces, he knew that he would stop soon and step inside the bakery about half a mile from his house. If not the bakery, then it would be Bellini's Italiano, or the Blimpies, or some other place where he could eat his anxiety away. As it happened, it was none of those. George had slowed to a slow jog, puffing like a bellows, when he heard a voice over the music in his earbuds. "Hello, friend. Why not come in and see our haunted house?" George jumped. He shouldn't have been able to hear anyone with the earbuds in, but he'd heard the man as clearly as if he'd been a commercial before the next song. George looked up and found a strange man in an immaculate black suit, a sharp top hat swept off in one hand, and he reminded George of a ringmaster at a circus. The haunted house he was standing in front of was a little underwhelming for the $5 entry fee that was posted, but the sign did say there was a money-back guarantee. The sign below was what caught George's eye. The sign read, "Free buffet within," and George had never turned down a chance at a free meal. Is it scary?" George asked, liking a good scare as much as a good nosh. "Trust me, young man, there are life-changing scares inside, and there is something for every palate." That was all George needed to hear. He handed the man a tin, the smallest bill he had at hand, and walked through the crepe paper streamers and right into the puff of acrid smoke. George coughed as he waved it away, the smell truly awful, but it was soon replaced with the most heavenly aroma George had ever smelled. He found himself in a pub that looked straight out of a beer garden. Each of the tables held people eating from large silver trays, and each tray was filled with gastronomical delights. The people eating looked normal enough to him as well. No one was half the size of George himself, and he took a seat in an available booth as he waited to be helped. "Hi," said a woman, who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "Is this your first time dining with us?" "Yes," George said, reaching for a menu, but seeing nothing. "I've never even seen a place like this. I had no idea something like this even existed. Do I just tell you what I want, or—" "No need, sir. We know everything you want, and it will be delivered." "How could you know what I—" But she was already gone, and George was talking to himself. Looking around at the plates heaped high with delicious food, George wondered what she would bring him. How could she possibly know what he wanted? And what would be the cost of such a meal? There was no way this could all be covered by the measly $10 he had dropped off at the gate. They would tally up the bill at the end, and if it was anything over $10, then George would be sunk. He hadn't exactly come flush with cash for a run, and he was suddenly afraid he might have to call his mother. "Your food, sir?" George nearly fell out of his seat, turning to find the woman at his side again with a big tray. A tray as big as a manhole cover, in fact. She took off the lid to reveal exactly what she had promised. The tray was piled high with roast beef and mashed potatoes, both dripping with gravy, the puffed and golden crab delights that his mother always made when company was coming over, and the steaming meat pies that she made for his birthday, the ones that never seemed to last long enough. George had to wipe his mouth to keep from drooling, and when the tray came down, he was already reaching for the first pie. Is this all covered in the door price? There's no way that all of this can be for the $5 entry fee. He looked up at her nakedly, his eyes begging for it to be true, and that was when he really saw the woman. She was petite, thin in that waifish way that some men liked, and her brown hair was piled up in a messy bun atop her head. Had he met this woman before? She seemed familiar, but lots of people did in this town. Familiar wasn't exactly the right word, however, and George knew it. It seemed like he had known her, like someone who has an imperfect memory knows someone who's gone now. You've paid the price for entry. The food is bought and paid for, and there will be another tray, if you want one after this. That was all that George needed to know. He looked for silverware, but when he found none on the table, he knew what he had to do. He dug his fingers into the pie, scooping it with gusto as he devoured the meat. It was still hot enough to burn his fingers, but he didn't care. It went into his mouth in handfuls, and he was soon left with nothing but an empty tray. As he ate, his eyes glazed over as they always did. The act of scratching his itch, an itch that lay deep in his stomach, was cathartic somehow, and the more he ate, the less it galled him. This was the main reason he was still heavy, despite his nightly runs, and it was a soothing tactic that had been there since childhood. When he failed a test or bombed an assignment, his mother would feed him. When he was rejected by a girl or laughed at by his peers, his mother would feed him. When he had lost his fiancée and fallen into despair, his mother had fed him. Glenda, George thought, and a lump of meat threatened to choke him as he worried it down. He hadn't thought about her in quite some time. "Are you ready for more, sir?" George started, drawn from thought as the woman reappeared. He started to tell her that he wasn't nearly finished yet, but he looked down to see that that wasn't true. His face and hands were covered in gravy and grease, and it appeared that he had finished the tray as he sat there thinking about his only real relationship, the one that had failed so titanically. Seeing his face on the surface of the gravy-caked plate, George thought he looked like a baby, but the woman seemed not to mind. When she bent down to wipe the gravy from his face with a fresh napkin, George was struck again with the idea that he knew her. Had he seen her in a photograph somewhere? Had he seen her in his dreams, maybe? "There, I went ahead and brought you a fresh tray, George. Go ahead and eat as much as you want." She set the tray down and took the old one with a fluid motion that was almost magical. She was gone before he could question it, but once he had looked at the tray, his questions were void. This one held 8 of the steaming meat pies, the ones he loved so much, and each bite tasted like a different birthday. His 6th birthday, when his mother had spent her whole paycheck on presents and had wondered how she would pay the bills. His 12th birthday, when she had taken him to the zoo and he had been allowed to ride an elephant and pet a tiger. His 8th birthday, when he had woken up to find a car in the driveway, just for him. His 29th birthday, when he had sat at the table and cried over his lost future, his mother feeding him the meat pies he loved so much until he finally passed out. Glenda had left him the day before, but it had taken him a few hours to process it. They had been making plans to celebrate his birthday, plans that she did not want to include his mother, but still, his mother had inserted herself. She had called him to guilt him, not believing that she wouldn't get to see her son on his birthday, telling him how she had been baking all afternoon and that he couldn't have his pies or his presents if he didn't come over for the evening. He had been looking at Glenda as he talked to her, and he could see her face changing as he progressively gave more and more ground. Glenda had been a complete surprise to both George and his mother. He had met her at work, an intern from a different branch, and they had placed her in his project group. The two had hit it off at once, and their burgeoning relationship was only really a surprise to the two of them. It wasn't long before their dates became plans to live together, and his mother had been against it from the start. "She's nothing but trouble, just interested in your money. Don't let her turn your head. Her type are a dime a dozen." This time, however, George hadn't given in. A month after that conversation, the two had been living together, and George had been smitten. They had gotten on well, the two doing their chores easily, and Glenda cooked almost as well as his mother. They enjoyed each other's company, and enjoyed learning about each other, and when George proposed, the only one that had had a problem with it was his mother. She's no good for you, Georgie. When are you going to see that you're better off without her? Well, if you marry her, I won't be there. I won't watch you throw your life away. George had spent the next 6 months trying to smooth things over, and that had facilitated a lot of time spent away from home and with his mother. Glinda understood, but she was beginning to hate being the second most important woman in his life. They'd been arguing as his birthday got closer and closer, and when he hung up the phone and told her they would be going to spend the evening with his mother, Glinda had refused. No, if you go and give her what she wants, I won't be here when you get back. George hadn't understood, but when she went to their room to pack a bag, he had finally got it. I can't be the second most important woman in your life, George. If you want to marry me, I have to be your priority. Your mother will never approve of me. That much is obvious. And you continuing to give her what she wants is as disrespectful to me as it is to yourself. They had talked. They had argued. But in the end, she had left. She had left, and George had gone back to his mother. The apartment was gone now. George went back long enough to get his stuff, but he couldn't stand to spend much time there. The wounds were too fresh, and he could see her in every room. She'd been the best thing to happen to him, and he had thrown it all away. Don't think about that, Georgie, said a voice to his left. She's gone now. You're exactly where you need to be. George looked up and saw the woman before him, though she looked very different now. She'd aged a decade, her chestnut hair now lighter, more a muddy brown. She wore glasses on her pug nose, and her bun was less messy now. She was holding another tray, and as she set it down, George realized he'd eaten every single pie on the other one. George thought she looked even more familiar, maybe a relative or something, and when she took the lid off, the smell of vanilla flan hit him like a train. Vanilla flan. He had eaten it every year at least once since he was old enough for solid food. His mother cooked well. His gut was a testament to that. But she made flan better than anyone he had ever known. It was the perfect combination of solid and jiggly, the vanilla not too overpowering, and he felt the saliva slip from his mouth as he looked at the mountain of delicious dessert. "This is all you need, Georgie," came the woman's voice, and when he looked back, he saw why she sounded so familiar. When he saw her, he remembered a picture he had seen on her wedding day, the one that used to sit over the fireplace. She had stood beside his father, looking girlish and white, and she was as removed from the toad that had sat on the couch as George was from his father. She was leering over him now, her smile wide and predatory, and when George tried to pull away, he felt the trap too late. He looked down to find a chain around his leg, a chain leading to the leering witch beside him, and George realized he was stuck. "Now you won't leave me again, Georgie," she crooned, lifting a handful of flan in her witch's claw. "You're trapped now. No running from Mommy anymore. The only tart to distract you from me will be the ones that come out of my oven. Now, get back to the table and finish your meal." George pulled at the shackle, but his leg was stuck tight. He remembered a line from A Christmas Carol about how Jacob Marley had forged his chain in life, and George realized that he was no different. He had forged the chain that connected him to his mother over years and years, making her as dependent on him as he was on her. The two were chained together in a parasitic relationship, and neither of them benefited from it. "No," he stuttered. his voice cracking as the chain drew taut. "No, I won't. You can't. You can't do this to me. I'm a grown man." But even as he said it, he realized it was a lie. Suddenly, he was a little boy, the thing he would always be to this woman, and they were standing around the family dining table. The floor was that banana yellow tiling, the table lacquered wood with faux leather chairs. He was 8 or maybe 9, his body just starting to turn into the formless mound it would become, and his mother was looming over him in her floral apron, a wooden spoon in her hand that dripped red sauce. She was offering him spaghetti, a bowl huge and oozing, and the way she towered over him made the food feel like a threat. "Don't you dare speak to me that way," she bellowed, her voice booming as it bounced off the tile. "You will get back to the table and finish your food, young man." George was shivering. The woman standing over him was a cruel stand-in for his mother, crueler even than the toad analogy had ever been. She truly was the witch now, inviting children into her candy house so they could be eaten. George knew that he had to get away, but the chain wasn't the only thing keeping him here. Despite her overbearing pressure, his eyes still strayed to the spaghetti that hunkered on the plate. Despite his fear, despite his horror, his mouth still gushed to have just one bite of his mom's spaghetti, and he had to wipe his mouth so he wouldn't drool on the floor. His mother was not the biggest problem, and until he kicked his dependence on food, he would always be shackled to her. He had never thought of it like that, but now that he was face to face with the facts, he felt a sudden rush of revulsion for the confection dripping from her fingers. "No," George said, standing up as he faced her squarely. "What?" she nearly hissed, the spoon snapping in her clenched fist. "I said no. I'm done being a slave to comfort. It's not healthy, Mom. It's not healthy to gorge my feelings and starve my soul. No more healthy than it is to cling so tightly to a son who's outgrown the nest. I need to go. I need to be my own man. I need to be happy. And so do you." He blinked, and he was suddenly back in the crowded bar restaurant. His mother still loomed large above him, but now she seemed unsure of herself, as if this was not going the way she planned. As he spoke, he felt the shackle loosen, the links growing rubbery as they fell away. He stood up, the two of them locking eyes as she desperately tried to transfix him again before he turned for the door. She shrieked after him, calling him back, but George was walking out of the restaurant. As he passed through the smoke again, he thought it might have smelled a little less acrid than before, and when he walked back onto the street, he was reaching for his phone. "I trust you found enough to eat," the barker said, smiling knowingly as George reached into his pocket and dropped his remaining 10 spot into the box. "I believe I may be satisfied for the first time in my life." "Thank you, sir," he said. Her number was still in his phone, and she picked up on the second ring as he walked away from the haunted house. "I know I have no right to ask you, not after what I put you through, but I need help, and I'm ready to accept that you might be right." The barker smiled as the man walked away, making his plans as he put the past behind him. "Another satisfied customer," he whispered. Deeper, deeper, and deeper still, we go into the haunted maze of the Barker's haunted house. But let's stop for a bit of libation, shall we, as we hear a little more about Dutch courage. Andre raised an eyebrow at the shoddy-looking haunted house. "This is the one you want to visit?" he asked Miguel, as the two stood on the sidewalk. This time of the year, the city had a haunted house on every corner, it seemed, and Andre wasn't sure why Miguel wanted to visit this one in particular. "What's wrong with it?" Miguel asked, looking out on the small crowd out front. "I read about it online. They say it's supposed to be wild." Andre rolled his eyes. Miguel put too much stock in Reddit and Instagram sometimes. "It looks like an elementary school open house showing. Are they taking money? This thing can't be worth $5. The crowd outside was small, but they were indeed taking donations. As a woman walked out, putting more money in the box as she stumbled away, Andre had to wonder if it might not be too scary. The woman had a look about her that he had seen on the faces of refugees and disaster victims. But there was something else there too. She looked like she'd been through hell, but she seemed utterly at peace as well. What kind of spook house was this? "Everyone online says what's inside is way better," Miguel said, taking his arm. "Come on, Andy. I don't want to go by myself." Andre rolled his eyes, leaning against his boyfriend as he reached into his jacket with his free hand and took out the flask he kept there. He turned his head and took a sip so no one would notice. Not like anyone but Miguel would anyway. Miguel was bad enough, but Andre didn't want strangers thinking he was a lush. He just needed a little something to get him through what was likely to be a close-quarters situation. "Again?" Miguel asked, pitching his voice low as the whiskey slid down his throat. "Dutch courage, Em. Just a little Dutch courage," Andre said, only slurring a little. It was what it said on the flask, after all. It was a phrase that Andre had heard his whole life, and had been his father's favorite phrase. His dad had been a drinker, but never a drunk. He'd been a gambler, but never an addict. Andre Sr., though no one called Andy Jr. if they knew it was good for them, had been a man who liked to work hard and play harder. Andre could remember going to the bar with his dad, watching him play cards or darts or whatever the night's game was with the other fellows from the mill. Andre Sr. didn't win every time, but he came home with money more than he came home without. The flask Andre kept now was from his dad, his lucky charm, and before he took a drink, he would always say he needed a shot of Dutch courage to give him luck. Andre didn't have his dad's knack for pub games, but the flask had still brought him plenty of luck. He'd had it when he met Miguel. He'd had it when he landed the job at Brewster Financial as their CS lead. He'd had it when he'd come away from an accident that had killed his old man without a scratch, but only then because his old man had offered it to him a second before the semi cut across the double line and hit the passenger side hard enough to cut the car in half. Miguel didn't push the matter, but Andre knew it was something he worried about. "Evening, boys," the barker said, and Andre held out their entry fee. "I hope you're ready for a truly terrifying experience." "Wouldn't miss it," Miguel said. "Instagram says this is the best haunted house in the city." "I can't speak to the experience," the barker said, smiling, "but it's sure to be a life-changing experience." "Can't wait," Andre said, taking another sip from the flask. When had he brought it out again? He thought briefly. He didn't remember taking it out, but it was in his hand regardless. Miguel had noticed too, though he had the good grace not to say anything. Miguel was a good person. He would never shame Andre for his burgeoning alcoholism, but Andre almost wished that he would. The alternative was that he worried, and that worry felt like insects on his skin sometimes. The alcohol wasn't for him, however, and he wished that he could explain that to Miguel. It had always been like that, even before he had the flask. Ever since he was young, Andre had snuck little nips of alcohol when he thought that no one was looking. It wasn't because he needed it. It was Dutch courage. Whenever he was nervous or anxious or just unsure of what to do, Andre would take a little of the fiery liquid, and it would help him get through the potentially hairy situation. Over the years, he'd become dependent on the taste of liquor to help keep his anxiety in check. and had he been more introspective, he might have realized that he was more dependent on the alcohol than any actual alcoholic. It was his magic feather, the courage that was inside him all along, and he loved the way he felt when he was courageous. As the pair walked beneath the papier-mâché arch and into the smoke of the fog machine, Andre coughed deeply as it enveloped him, thicker than he would have expected. It smelled weird, like gasoline and smoky tires, and when Miguel let go of his arm, Andre tried to call out to him. Was this a scare tactic? Were they being separated? He knew this was something that happened in some haunted houses, but Andre didn't mean to be singled out. He coughed again. Miguel! Miguel? Andre wasn't in the little tunnel created by the alley and the papier-mâché decorations that someone had hastily thrown together, though. Andre was on the street, a street that he knew all too well. Laverne and Santos, 3 a.m., November 13th, 2012. He hadn't been here in the flesh for 10 years, but it was a place he had gone to in his dreams many times. There was a car in the middle of the street, a very familiar red hatchback, and inside was an all too familiar person. Andre had last seen his father as they took what was left of him from the car, and in his dreams, he was always a mangled corpse. Now, however, he was smiling and pounding on the car door, calling for Andre to help him. Andre, get me out of here! The truck! Andre looked up the street, and sure enough, a monstrous semi had just rounded the corner. It was bigger than it had been in reality, its cab red and looking devilish in the slanted streetlights. The cab was festooned with spikes, the exhaust pipes curved like a demon's horns, and behind the wheel sat a creature with a skinless face. It was silently laughing, the truck careening closer and closer to the hatchback as Andre stood on the sidewalk, frozen in fear. He wanted to move, wanted to save his dad, but he was powerless to move an inch. Dutch courage. He needed a shot of Dutch courage to get his legs moving. He reached into his coat, but even as he pulled the flask out, he knew it was empty. That didn't stop him from spinning the cap and pressing it to his lips, trying to shake out the last drops from the guts of the thing. When it proved fruitless, he started to drop it, but a quick look showed him that the flask didn't have the usual maxim written on it. It was the same color, the same size, but this time it read "Socialize" on the outside. He dropped it to the pavement, reaching for another as his dad screamed for help. The semi got closer when he was looking at it, barreling forward like a bat out of hell, but when he looked away to check another pocket for his flask, it almost seemed to return to its previous position. Andre searched for another flask, finding one in the front pocket. As he pulled it out, he felt the telltale slosh of alcohol. He unscrewed it and put it to his lips, waiting for the liquid fire that would give him strength. But it was empty too. He glanced at it before he threw it to the ground, and the outside of this one said "work." Ah, yes. How many times had he needed that little extra push to make it through a presentation? How many sips had he taken while out with a client at lunch? It had started as just a little bit to get him through something hard, but these days it seemed like Andre needed it just to make it through the day. He shook off the thought, needing to help his dad, but as he searched for another, he heard a new voice calling from the car, a voice that made his blood run cold. Andy, help me!" His mother's fists were so small, so delicate, and yet they rattled the glass as she banged against them in fear. Andre searched, his anxiety fresh as the loss mounted. Andre and his mother hadn't been as close as he and his father, but in the wake of his dad's death, they had clung to each other for strength. When he'd come out to her a few years ago, afraid of how it would change their relationship, he had cried when she accepted him. As they hugged each other, Andre was glad for the first time that his father had died before he had fully come to terms with his own sexuality. His father loved him, but He had always suspected that Andre's orientation would have driven a wedge between them. His mother, however, had embraced him with open arms, and she had loved Miguel when he brought him home to meet her. As she screamed for help, Andre found another flask, and this one said love on it. He opened it, but it bore no fruit either. "Andy? Andy, I need you. Please help me." He looked up when he heard Miguel's voice join the chorus, the spit in his mouth turning to sand. "Mickey," Andre breathed, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of all of this. The car was getting quite full now, the three of them bumping against each other as they tried to get his attention, and Andre wondered how much longer he would have to look. He was ashamed to say that courage had been especially necessary in his love life. He had never had any luck with women, and he saw now that his lack of game might have been his own subconscious trying to wake him up. Even after that clarity, he still found it difficult to break the ice. When he had a belly full of Dutch courage, though, he was charming and witty, the life of the party, and he felt that if it weren't for his ace in the hole, he would never have gotten with Miguel. Now, without the liquid luck to move him, he would lose him forever if he wasn't careful. The flasks began to fall from him like magic tricks from a wizard's sleeve. Action, personality, courage, wit, they all joined the collection, and before he knew it, Andre had a lot of company on the sidewalk, and still he was frozen in fear without his secret weapon. His legs shook as he watched the semi slowly careening towards them, and he gritted his teeth as he tried to take a step. His legs were heavy, but he found they would move if he made them. He took one, then another, but that seemed to speed the semi up a little. Suddenly, he was afraid that he wouldn't make it, and every time he looked away, it was a little closer when it returned to its place. "Why can't I move?" he growled through his teeth, but as something jingled around his hand, he suddenly knew the reason. The flasks hadn't stayed on the sidewalk where he'd left them. They had come with him, chained to him by long links that stretched into his skin and went below the surface. They weighed him down, their freedom an illusion. He was shackled to them as they were to him, and as the semi sped forward, Andre realized what he needed to do. He grabbed the first chain, hearing the dull thud of his family as they beat at the glass, and ripped it free. The chain fell to the concrete, blood spattering the pavement, and Andre cried out in the worst pain of his life. He'd been hurt before, a couple of times bad enough to go to the hospital when he played football in high school, but this was worse. This pain was like the loss of his father, like the loss of a lover, something deep and intimate, like scratching an itch in reverse. He ripped them out faster now, tearing himself to bloody ribbons as he detached the dead weight from him. Each chain pulled out with a feeling of intense loss, something like losing an organ or an attached twin. And as the last one fell, he found that he could run again. The newfound freedom seemed to give him new speed, and he practically flew to the car and wrenched at the door. He had made it. He was going to save them. They wouldn't have to die, and they could go home and be a family again, and the door was locked. "Miguel, Dad, someone open the door," he shouted, pulling impotently at the handles. They weren't beating or banging anymore, though. The car was silent now as he tugged at the door, and that was worrisome. They had been so vocal to get him over here, and Andre now feared some trick. They had lured him here like sirens of old, and now it would be him who was smashed by the truck. He peeked into the windows, trying to see what was happening, but they were all looking at him, smiling like their lives weren't in danger. It took his breath away to see his dad smiling again, something he never thought he would see in life. "I'm proud of you, son. You did what I couldn't, and proved that you don't need anything but your own courage. Now it's time to prove it to yourself," his mother said, putting her hand against the window and splaying her fingers to make a starfish. "Time to prove it every day, until you believe it yourself." "I know you can," Miguel said, putting his forehead beside his hand. "Best of luck, Andy." The lights from the left blinded him, and when Andre turned, he saw the semi bearing down on them. He covered his eyes with an arm, and when the horn blared, he coughed as the exhaust took his breath away. He came stumbling out of the haunted house, the smoke swirling around him as he tried to find his bearings. "Andre!" came a concerned voice, a voice he would never mistake for any other. "Andy, you okay?" Miguel was beside him in an instant, and as Andre pulled him close, he kissed his hair as if he had to be sure he was real. "Is it really you, Mickey?" he said, using the pet name he never seemed quite comfortable with outside their apartment. Miguel laughed, not seeming to understand. "Yeah, Andy, it's me. Where'd you go?" "Jesus, Andre, calm down. It's only been a few minutes. Don't tell me you missed me that much." Andre covered his mouth with his, surprising him, before pulling back and laughing. "I guess I was just worried," he said, pulling Miguel close as the two left the mouth of the alley. As they went by, Andre reached into his pocket and dropped another 10 into the box. "So generous," Miguel teased. "I suppose you had a good time then?" Andre nodded, pulling him close as the two headed towards whatever came next. "It was certainly an experience I'll never forget," he said with a smile. The barker grinned as he looked into the box, seeing the 10 spot wrapped around a battered old flask that Andy had left behind as well. "Another satisfied customer," he half whispered, grinning. "Now that we've had our drink, may I entice you with a little smoke? Well, of course we all know, though, where there's smoke, there's fire." "Hey, if you're gonna do that, then take it outside." Rita was about 2.5 sheets to the wind, but the sound of Dominic's less-than-docile tones brought her back down to half a sheet. She had the cigarette in her mouth, the flames inching from the sparking tip, and she was left in tableau as the other patrons of the Lucky Stool stood and looked at her. If there was one thing Rita hated, other than the cravings she got from not having a cigarette about every 20 minutes, it was everyone looking at her. "It's a bar, Dom. You telling me you can't smoke in here?" "Yes, Rita, for the 1,000th time since the city passed the ordinance. I will lose my license if I let you smoke in here, so either take it outside or put it away." People were talking behind their hands now, and the band had stopped mid-song to listen. Not good. Not good at all. "Fine," Rita said, pushing away from the bar as she headed for the door. "I'll just—" But what she just did, however, was trip over the power cord that one of the band members had forgotten to tape down and go sprawling on her face. She wasn't hurt, not really, but as she came up, the cigarette that was still in her mouth was bent into an L. She cursed, pushing the hands away as they tried to help her up. And that's when she heard the chuckles towards the back of the bar. Were they laughing at her now, too? "Rita?" Dominic asked, trying to help her up. "Are you—" But she elbowed away from him and practically ran for the street. The tears, she could already feel the tears. They were hot and heavy and on the verge of breaking, and she did not want these people to see her cry. She was embarrassed enough as it was, and if they saw her crying, then she would have to go find another bar to drink herself stupid at 5 days a week. More than anything else, Rita wanted a cigarette. As she came out onto the sidewalk, she was already teasing a new smoke out of the packet. She shivered as the autumn chill raked across her arms, and wished she had thought to wear her hoodie. The forecast had called for it to be slightly warmer than the night before, however, so she had left it lying on her bed and walked to the Lucky Stool with nothing but a half-pack of Luckies and the 20 that she had in her front pocket. She raised her lighter to spark the cigarette, but as the wheel clicked and the flint threw up little more than useless discharge, she growled in frustration. It had likely gotten damaged in the fall, and as she walked along hoping for a decent spark, she felt her frustration mounting. This kind of thing always seemed to happen in bunches. She had been having a good time, drinking and listening to Maverick Men as they played a sort of slow rock that she enjoyed. She'd been talking with her friends, she'd been getting deliciously buzzed, and above all else, she'd been forgetting about life for a while. Rita had a lot of problems, but forgetting about life was the one thing that made them all tolerable. Rita gasped, nearly losing her smoke, as one of the clicks sparked a usable flame, and the warm smell of cigarette smoke filled her nostrils for a moment, before the wind blew it back out. Rita loved that smell. It always reminded her of home. It was her earliest memory, and it always made her think of her parents. Randy and Cora Dabber, dad and mom to their daughter Rita, had been veteran smokers even before their daughter had come along. They had smoked since before they had met each other, and they had seen no reason to quit just because Cora had caught pregnant in her sophomore year. Cora's father had seen a reason for an impromptu marriage, shotgun or not, and the two had started playing house instead of going to algebra class. Randy had gotten a job. Cora kept busy keeping the 2-bedroom trailer that sat at the back of her parents' property, and the two had been happy enough. Neither had lamented their lost youth. Neither had blamed the other for unfulfilled dreams, and both of her parents were simply creatures that were content to exist. Rita remembered the old trailer fondly. It had been the backdrop for so many of her fondest childhood memories, but Rita chose to blunt those memories rather than try to live with them. The one thing she did remember was the smell of cigarettes. Rita's parents were chain smokers, 2 packs each a day sometimes, and the trailer was always possessed of a thick smell of tobacco. Rita didn't mind, though she knew the other kids did. Most of her friends told her that she stank, that her clothes smelled smoky, but it always brought Rita comfort. She was like a child who has long ago learned to ignore the smell of litter boxes or a favorite food as it cooks and find a sense of homecoming in the smell. That being said, sometimes the smoke reminded her of something else. Sometimes, when she couldn't use the booze or the nicotine high to forget, the smoke reminded her of that night when she came home to find her parents weren't the only thing smoking. Those thoughts had been what drove her to drink, and what had ultimately driven her to the bar again. Rita was only 24, too young to have thrown her life away, but that's what she had done. She had let the dreams of that burning house and that hopeless cough bring her gasping from sleep every night since she was 16, and over the years it had taken its toll. She had gotten lucky, and someone had noticed her art in high school. They had extended her a scholarship to Praymore, a little art school in town that worked with up-and-coming talent. She had been taking classes, working on her craft, and her aunt had been proud of her for making it on her own. But the longer she came awake with the smell of that burning house in her nose, the more she had been nursing those burns with cigarettes and alcohol. She had been drinking since high school, more so after the accident, and the cigarettes had become more than a guilty pleasure once she didn't have to sneak them. She didn't enjoy them. Well, that was a lie. She enjoyed the euphoric rush of nicotine as it filled her, but that wasn't what she craved. When she lit the tip and smelled the burning tobacco, she was transported back to that old trailer, to a time when she sat between her parents on the couch and smelled the aroma of stale cigarettes. For those few moments, she was home. She too became a chain smoker, especially when she drank, and with every one she lit, the peace in her mind became more and more fleeting. The alcohol helped too, especially when it came to sleep, but it was a self-destructive combination. Eventually, between cutting classes to smoke or showing up drunk from the night before, they had little choice but to put her out. Sort yourself out, Rita. You're a talented artist, but you have picked up some self-destructive habits. We want to see you succeed, and we wish you wanted the same. That had begun Rita's spiral, a spiral that had taken her to this very spot on the sidewalk, with her bum lighter and her unlit cigarette that was just waiting for a "Need a light, ma'am?" Rita jumped as the stranger's face was lit momentarily by the dancing flames of his silver lighter. She turned to find a carnival barker standing 2 feet away from her. She had come up the sidewalk, not really looking where she was going, and had found herself in front of a shabby-looking haunted house. It had been covered with a stage curtain and looked to have been built into the mouth of an alley. From the streamers to the decorations, the whole thing just screamed Dollar General rush job, and it all looked very cheap. Rita leaned down to accept the light, however, before thanking the stranger in the over-the-top suit. "No problem, young lady. I wonder, however, if I might interest you in a trip through our haunted house. It's only a $5 donation, and we guarantee your money back if you do not have an authentic, life-changing experience." Rita took another look at the frankly lame-looking haunted house and reached into her pocket to see what she had available. She had drunk up a lot of her folding money already, but she found 8 crumpled ones in there and tossed 5 into the box. She wasn't planning on experiencing much of anything in there, but it was October, and she'd take advantage of a free haunted house. "Splendid," said the barker. "Off you go. Best of luck." "Best of luck," Rita scoffed, shuddering as the crepe paper streamers brushed her. "No luck too," but her next words were lost in a cough. The fog machine had clouded her vision, and she was left pawing at the air as she tried to get past it. She suddenly wasn't so sure of herself. The smoke had turned into a fog bank, and the acrid fumes smelled less like party store smoke juice and more like the thick, choking smoke of a house fire. The same miasma that she had inhaled that night. The same thing that had... Suddenly, Rita was standing in the driveway of her parents' lot, the home she had grown up in, on fire. Rita was 16 again, and the little shorts that she had worn made the wind easily able to prickle her hairless flesh. She had her cork sandals in her head, her bandana clashing with her pixie cut, and the white crop top that had seemed so cute for the party seemed ill-advised for what lay before her. She could do little but stand there and watch the house burn, just as she had done that night, knowing that she would probably be in there too if she hadn't disobeyed her mother. She had snuck out to go to Jamie's party, mostly because Marissa had told her that Frank was going to be there. Frank Cartwright, the hunky theater kid who played all the tough guy roles in the school play, had been the object of her desire since 8th grade. Frank Cartwright, who had played the Danny to her Rizzo in last year's production of Grease, had come swaggering in like some pagan god who had decided to mingle with the mortals for a change. She had gone up to him, wanting to catch his eye before any of the other trailer park disasters could steal him from her, and he had apparently liked what he'd seen. Frank Cartwright, who had turned out to have Russian hands and Roman fingers, couldn't keep up with his animal lust. Frank Cartwright, the guy who had taken her virginity and left her unsatisfied after a solid 40 seconds of performance. Frank Cartwright, whom Rita had left sleeping in Franny's guest room, deciding to walk home in her state of dissatisfaction. That was why she was standing there at all, sandals in hand as she prepared for a lecture from her mother. Her mother wasn't a fool, and everyone in the trailer park knew the sort of parties that went on at Fran's house when her parents were out of town. She had forbidden Rita to go, but Rita had been sneaking out since middle school and was pretty sure that she could get back in without waking them up. If her mother was waiting up for her, however, there was likely to be an ass chewing. But as she watched the trailer go from a campfire to an inferno, Rita wished that she could take that chewing now, as opposed to what was to come. She dropped her sandals and ran for the door, hoping to save her parents, but already knowing that she couldn't. In reality, the chain had been on, and no amount of beating would get her inside. Whatever this was, the door had opened easily, and Rita walked inside, coughing as she called for her mom and dad. She found her dad first, and she wished she hadn't. The fire marshal had told the insurance company that her dad had been the epicenter of the blaze, or more specifically, the cigarette that had fallen into his lap had. Her father worked as a grease monkey at the Lube Pro, and he hadn't come home yet when Rita snuck out. It appeared that he hadn't bothered to take off his jumpsuit when he had come home, and he'd crashed in his armchair to have a smoke and watch the end of the Late Show before cleaning up. He had fallen asleep, and the cigarette had tumbled into his lap, igniting whatever chemicals he had worn home that day. The blaze had been out of hand by the time the smoke woke her mother up, and by then, it had already done for her as well. Her father had been little more than a burnt husk by the time they had found him, but as she looked at him now, Rita saw him screaming as his chest burned inward. His flesh was turning to ash before her eyes, his mouth open in an everlasting scream as the fire devoured him like a candle. The flames spread quickly over the room, cooking him as they took his life, and Rita heard him calling her name as his skin fell away like char from a log. "Rita! Rita! Rita!" he screamed, and she backed away as he cooked. His screams sounded like a dying animal's more than a human's, as the fire took his throat and face. Suddenly he was nothing but a braying skeleton, his skin gone but his voice remaining. Rita backed away, wanting it all to stop, and turned to flee deeper into the house. What the hell kind of haunted house was this? Rita wasn't even sure she was still in the haunted house, and the more she ran, the more she wondered if she was having a stroke. Had she fallen into some kind of psychotic episode and was frothing on the ground while her brain played out the worst day of her life on repeat? Had she been drugged at the bar and was hallucinating? Whatever was happening, Rita really wanted it to stop. She was running not to her room, but to her mother's room, and saw her mother smoldering on the bed as she coughed her life away. Her mother had actually died in the hallway, the smoke inhalation having done for her, but Rita found her in bed as the floor burned like a winter fire around her. She was hacking, coughing, calling Rita's name as she reached for her. She needed help. She needed Rita's hand to get out of bed and stop the coughing, but before her eyes, her mother began to melt. Her skin puddled on the bedspread like hot clay, and she fell inward with a patter like boiling oil. Her eyes fell out of her head, rolling like marbles as her skin cooked, and Rita screamed as she backed out into the hall. She had to get out of here. She had to run, but the fire was everywhere, and there was no escape now. She was trapped, just as her parents had been trapped, and as she fell to her bottom on the island of carpet in that sea of heat, she reached for her smokes. She needed a light. She needed a cigarette. She needed to fill her lungs with that sweet heat and forget all about this. She needed to forget, to find her reprieve. She needed to escape all of this and just be herself for a while. Someone took the cigarette out of her mouth before she could light it, and she looked up to see her father standing over her. He wasn't the burning pyre that he had been earlier, and though sooty, he was more as she remembered him in life. "No more of that, Moonbug," he said, sitting beside her as she sobbed in the hallway. "You need to stop obsessing over this and get past us." She looked at her father through teary eyes, trying to understand what he was saying. But, no buts, kid. It ain't healthy. You aren't responsible for what happened to us. If anything, it was my carelessness. But if I'd been here," she started. But as the bedroom door opened, she saw her mother coming gracefully out of the room. She was in her plain nightgown, her hair in curlers like she'd been on the night of their last fight. But she was all smiles now as she took her seat on Rita's other side. "You'd be dead too, very likely. Rita, this wasn't your fault. You can't blame yourself for what happened to us. And there's no reason to smoke yourself to death trying to remember us either." Rita put her head between her knees, the tears now silent as they wet her skin. "But," She started trying to articulate how they made her feel. But for those few moments that I smell the smoke and taste the burn, it's like we're a family again. I can remember being happy in our trailer, happy with myself, and I can forget that I had to wait alone for the fire truck as I listened to you cough yourself to death. Her mother put an arm around her, and it was so real that she had to look up to make sure she was actually there. It doesn't matter, Rita. The longer you wallow in the past, the longer it will be before you get over it. Throw these away. Live your life. And let us go. You could be so much more if only you'd let us die. Rita reached into her pocket and pulled out the Luckies, looking at the comfortable red and white packaging. Luckies were the brand that her father smoked, and she always remembered seeing the top poking out of his shirt pocket. Her hands trembled as she tried to make them work, and Rita was afraid for a moment that she wouldn't have the strength. "Do it," her father said. "Cast us off. Live your own life." Rita felt fresh tears as she tossed the package into the fire, and when she wiped them away, she was alone in the dark and dirty alley. There was no fire, no ghosts of her dead parents, but that didn't mean that she hadn't found something. She wobbled a little as she walked through the smoke and crate paper, walking up to the barker like someone in a dream. "I do hope your experience was But she cut him off as she wrapped him in a hug. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling away as she walked down the sidewalk, heading for home. She could email the school tonight and begin taking classes next semester. It would be hard work, but she could manage it. Rita was stronger than she knew, and she felt lighter now, lighter than she had since she was a kid. The barker smiled as her stride gained confidence, losing the unsure sway that it had held when they had began. Another satisfied customer. One more story for you, and I promise I've saved something good before we pop out the back door of the Barker's haunted house, safe and sound, and maybe a little wiser for the journey. Let's finish off with a tale about those who do unto others as they would not have them do unto themselves. Let's hear a story about a man who's obsessed. As he says, "Hey there, Delilah." Delilah moved up the sidewalk, looking behind her as she went. She was so pretty tonight, so full of vim, and Gavin just couldn't stop himself from following her. He'd been following her for months now, despite her clear discomfort and requests for him to stop. Gavin smirked as he thought about the last time that she had asked him to stop. They'd been outside her apartment, him on the bench and her waiting for a bus. She hadn't seen him right away, but when she had, Gavin had pretended that he hadn't seen her. She'd been content to ignore him for a little while, continuing to wait on her bus, but it seemed that she just couldn't stand it after a little while. He had found it hard not to smirk as she came walking up, trying to act tough, but looking so unsure of herself. "Gavin, I've tried to be nice to you, but if you keep doing this, I'm going to get a restraining order." He laughed at her. She was just so clueless. "Why do you play these games, Delilah? You know a restraining order wouldn't stop me, and we both know that you won't get one." She had blushed, cheeks turning as red as a tomato, but Gavin saw that she couldn't hold his stare. She tried to act tough, but they both knew she loved the attention. When she'd been hired at the warehouse, it had been love at first sight. She had looked so cute in her little apron and her glasses, and he had attached himself to her right away. She had been grateful at first for his help. She had thanked him for helping her learn the ropes and introducing her to the other people there. She had acted flattered by his casual flirting, but acted shy when he had touched her arm or shoulder. She hadn't told him no, not right away, but then he had escalated a little too quickly. He had arrived at her bus stop with coffee, offered to ride with her to work, and had randomly shown up at hangouts that she was having with her friends. She always accepted it good-naturedly, but Gavin had apparently misjudged the situation. Gavin wasn't blind, of course. He had noticed how shy she was when he stood close as they talked, or the way she stammered sometimes when he surprised her, the way she often stepped away when he tried to stand too close, and it was something that made him grin. But he knew the truth even if she didn't. She was just too naive to admit that she liked him back, or perhaps she just couldn't express her feelings properly. When HR called him in to discuss an inappropriate workplace interaction, he had assumed it was just yearly training. When they mentioned an anonymous report from a fellow employee, Gavin had laughed and shook his head. This had to be a prank, and he told them as much. He and Delilah were friends, good friends, and if she felt threatened by him, she would have surely said something. Regardless, they had transferred him to another shift to alleviate the problem, but that wouldn't stop him from seeing her. No matter what, they couldn't dampen his love for her. He showed up to see her on shift, found reasons to be places where she was, and her shyness began to render her speechless. It was okay. He found it endearing, and took full advantage as he talked to her about his day and how his new shift was going. He smiled sometimes when he saw her tremble, and could feel it in his arms when he held her hand. She was so cute, so taken with him, clearly, and he hoped that he could put the past behind them. The next time he'd been called into HR, it had been to tell him that he was fired. Gavin hadn't understood. He had the highest numbers of anyone on his shift, and he couldn't see why he was being fired. They said it was due to complaints, and he hadn't had to think hard about where those had come from. It hadn't been Delilah, never her, so it had to be the women who had worked on the shift with him before. They saw the attention he was showering on her and had gotten jealous. That was the only explanation. He left without any fuss, not wanting any backlash for Delilah, but they had to know. They couldn't stop their love like that. People might call it stalking, but Gavin and Delilah knew better, and that was all that really mattered. She turned suddenly, almost jumping as a man in an over-the-top suit greeted her. Gavin hid beside a stoop as the man gestured to the haunted house, clearly trying to entice her inside. Delilah looked back fretfully, probably afraid that Gavin would lose her, but when the man said something to her and spread his arms out to indicate the attraction, his love smiled wide and nodded strenuously as she reached into her purse for the entry fee. Gavin gave her a bit of a lead before making his way up to the attraction. "Good evening, young man. By any chance, are you the young gentleman that the woman ahead of you paid for?" Gavin's delight must have shown, because the barker smiled toothily. "I thought you might be. Go on ahead. She said you'd be right behind her." Gavin thanked the man and headed eagerly inside. It had taken some time, but it appeared she was finally ready to drop that shyness and reciprocate his affection. Gavin had known that he'd wear her down. Women love persistence, after all, and he had been very, very persistent. He coughed a little as he walked into a cloud of smoke, his lungs burning a little as he swirled within the fog of rotten eggs and old sweat. To his surprise, he came back out onto the street, stepping out the front door again as the barker continued to cry out for the attraction. "Excuse me," Gavin asked as he approached the man. "What's the big idea? Is this some kind of—" When the barker turned, however, Gavin took a step back in surprise. The barker's face had become his own. "Oh," he said suddenly, looking enchanted as he took a step forward. "It's you." His voice was enamored, taken completely by surprise, and his attention was unnerving. His eyes, Gavin's eyes, were laser focused on him, and Gavin felt their attention like bugs on his skin. The barker was getting closer, his tongue worrying at his lips, as he came much too close to Gavin. Gavin had never felt this level of scrutiny before in his life, and it was more than a little off-putting. "I wonder, would you like to have dinner with me?" the barker asked. "I know a great place down the road that serves sushi. We can get anything you like. Anything at all." Gavin took a step back. The suited man who was wearing his face had gotten much, much too close, and suddenly Gavin felt sure that he wanted to be anywhere but near this strange man. No thank you," Gavin heard himself say. "I think I have somewhere else to be. Excuse me." He started backing up, but that hardly discouraged the barker. His hands came out in front, greedy claws that longed to grab, and as Gavin ran, he could hear the man's boots clumping behind him. He was on the sidewalk now, pushing past people as he ran. He didn't have a clear destination in mind, but the situation was so strange that he wasn't sure what to do. He could see other people turning to mark his retreat, and he was just as surprised when he saw that they looked like him as well. He stood amongst a crowd of himself, their piggy eyes locked onto him as he ran from the barker, and when many of them began to move in his direction, he felt a swell of terror rising inside of him. They wet their lips, smirked like wolves sighting a chicken, and fell in behind him like they meant to slowly stalk him into submission. As they gathered, he heard them whispering to him, and the things they said made his skin crawl. "Where you going, cutie? Don't be in such a hurry. Hey, going my way? Why don't we walk together? I bought you a coffee. Want to share a cab?" As the crowd behind him grew, he was haunted by his own face as it swam up out of the crowd. It was almost like his presence spawned more of the doppelgangers, and as he ran, he felt hounded by them. What was going on? Was he still somehow in the haunted house? There was no way that this was happening. No way that he was being trailed by a group of his own copies. He couldn't imagine what was happening, but he knew that he didn't like it. He tripped over a bit of uneven sidewalk in his haste, and as he went down, he hissed as he scuffed his palms. The mob was slowly stalking him, coming up carefully as if trying not to be seen, and when someone offered him a hand, Gavin took it with a thank you. Their voice sounded normal, or at least not like a copy of his, and he glanced back as the strong arm pulled him to his feet. "Think nothing of it. Say, they aren't bothering you, are they?" the Good Samaritan asked, his voice taking on a spookily inquisitive tone. "Why don't you come with me? I'll help you get away. We can get some coffee, and you can tell me all about yourself." Gavin's face fell as he turned back to find his own grinning face leering at him, and he pushed him aside as he began to run. The helpful bystander stood smirking after him before the crowd enveloped and assimilated him. Gavin was looking frantically for an escape when he saw the bus pull in up ahead. The doors were open, and Gavin thought that if he could just get on board, then maybe he could lose them. They were still making their slow, careful way behind him, and it seemed that every person they encountered on their way to him became another face staring back at him with that same wet smirk. How had he never noticed how creepy that was? How had he never recognized how piggish his eyes were? Had he ever believed himself beautiful? Truly. The longer the mob followed him, the more he realized why Delilah had been trembling so often. It wasn't shyness or anticipation. Gavin was hideous, and she was terrified of him. He mounted the bus, only tripping once, but as he got to the top and looked over the nearly filled seats, he recognized his mistake. He saw his face reflected by every man, every woman, every child, and even by the baby in the arms of the rider, as they turned to regard him. He turned to run, but the doors closed in his face, the driver trapping him with this latest group. "Where's your find, good-looking?" Gavin barreled through the sliding doors, popping them open with a slight chuff of breaking joints, and was running in a blind fear now. He had to escape, had to get away, but to his horror, he saw a new group rising up to block him as he neared the movie theater he had so often gone to. He stopped, looking for a way out, but they offered none. "Nowhere to go, cutie. Nowhere to hide. If you didn't want so much attention, then you should have spoken up. You knew this was inevitable. Only a matter of time. A matter of time. A matter of time." He screamed as their words broke over him, looking to the sky as if expecting a deus ex machina to come and deliver him from the mob. This was some sort of cosmic punishment, he supposed, some sort of lesson he had to learn about how to treat others. He'd wake up outside the haunted house or in his bed, and he'd learn that he shouldn't stalk people, or how people weren't just objects for him to pursue. "I'm sorry," he yelled. "I've learned my lesson. Let me—" But they buried him then. They pushed him beneath their bulk, their bodies pressing in on him, and as they tore him to pieces, he screamed in agony. They ripped him limb from limb, yanked out his eyes, his tongue, separated all of him as their revenge. The whole time, he was surrounded by those wet, leering grins, and it was a mercy when he was blinded by their inquisitive fingers. Even though he couldn't see their faces, they were burned into his mind, and they followed him into darkness before a blinding light brought him back again. Gavin blinked, unsure of what to make of this, but coughing as he came back to himself again. He was back in front of the haunted house, back together again, and as he stood up, he smiled happily. It was just like Ebenezer Scrooge before him, and Gavin knew the lesson here. He was done stalking Delilah. He would never bother her again. He knew what it felt like now, and she would never see him ever again. He would leave town. He would go so far away that she would never have to worry about seeing him. For the rest of his days, he would strive to— "You okay, cutie? It's always nice to see you smile." His face fell as he heard his own voice mimicked back to him, and he turned to find the man in the very familiar suit. He screamed as the crowd began to circle him again, and when he came to this time, he was already running. Delilah peeked out the front door to make sure that he was gone before she timidly walked out of the haunted house. The nice man on the sidewalk had offered her a place to hide, but when he had told her that he could take care of the situation, she hadn't known what he meant. Was he going to talk to Gavin? Was he going to hurt him? She hated feeling like a deer constantly being chased, but she was just too nice to speak up. Gavin was a creep, but no creepier than her older brother had been. It almost seemed like something was punishing her when she left the sphere of influence, owned by her big brother, only to fall into another predator's hunting ground. The barker looked up as she walked towards him, smiling at her as he offered her the money that she had given him back. "You have nothing to fear, miss. He won't bother you any more." Do you promise?" she half whispered, not believing it could be true. "I do," said the barker, offering her a smile and a bow of his own. Delilah nearly wept, but instead of taking the money, she handed him a 20 and told him to keep it. "It's well worth it to be rid of my constant shadow," she said, practically skipping as she disappeared back into the crowd. The barker smiled. "Another satisfied customer," he said, looking back at the entrance before whispering, "Well, one, anyway." And just like that, we seem to have come to the end of our spooky tales and of our trip to the Barker's haunted house. I do hope you've enjoyed your stay here, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow for more great tales and more spooky fun on Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.